He was a Scotsman, and he was cautious. He was a farmer, unspoiled. He was a very good natural talent. I first met Jim Clark in my father's garage in Dumbarton when Jim Clark, he'd come in for petrol, and I saw him coming in because my mum and dad had a bungalow right next to the garage, and I knew who Jim Clark was then at the very, very early stages. And I rushed out of the home where he was getting filled up with petrol, and I never got to speak to him, but I saw Jim Clark.
Jimmy used to, in the early days, used to drive down from Duns in Scotland in his Porsche, race at the weekend, and then drive back up to Scotland, do his farming, and then came back down for the next race. A lovely bloke, very mild, very laid back.
He would have driven down from his farm in Borders at Duns, and he would come and look at what was happening to the cars, and he obviously turned out to be a very, very, very good, talented driver.
He was a farmer, and he dressed like a farmer, and he was shy and quiet. Gradually, as he had to make a decision in the end whether to start motor racing full time or farm, and he decided to go full time.
And then, of course, when I started winning, because there was a lot of the races that I was in Formula 3 was the runoff towards the Formula 1 race. Then I got to know Jimmy very, very well, and went often down to his place in the Borders, stayed with them, and we travelled together, and we were the two Scots. But he was the man. I mean, he was a gentle man. He was very shy in many, many ways. Didn't want to do too many talks, but a first-class man. Colin Chapman was one of the most remarkable men in the world of motorsport at the highest level. Jim Clark was a boy of his in the fullest sense. And none of the number 2 drivers were ever really there, because Jim drove in such a smooth way, never made mistakes.
Well, he was very, very interested in what was being done in the design of this and in the building of cars. He was team member, but remote from day-to-day operations. Jim Clark had a great respect for the engineering abilities of Colin Chapman, and they worked very well together.
And then Colin designed the 25, which is a full monocoque, which was as far as I know, the first one to be designed in motor racing. It was built around him, his driving style, and he could feed the information to Colin. He could adapt various suspension things. Anything Jimmy wanted would be done.
At Reims, in the heart of the Champagne country, the world's greatest drivers set off on the 273 miles of the French Grand Prix. And in the lead from the drop of the flag is Scotland's Jim Clark, Lotus number 18. Jim has 2 Grand Prix victories to his credit already this season, the Belgian and the Dutch. And if he carries on like this, he's going to finish up 1963 world champion. And Jim Clark does stay there, clocking a lap record on the way. Tony Maggs in second place and Graham Hill in third are still behind when Jim crosses the line. So now Jim's clear favourite for the world title.
Jim Clark was the best driver that I had seen, smooth and clean. Colin Chapman made very fragile cars. He asked for me to drive for him, and I never did. I found him as a wonderful individual, but his cars were fragile. Jim Clark was so smooth in his driving that he didn't have the kind of accidents that occurred in a lot of cars at that time.
As I said, he told Chapman various things about the car. Chapman would relay it to the chief mechanic and then to us, and we would get on with it.
There was no ifs or buts when Jimmy was in the car, that confidence was 100% of what he was doing, what he was saying, what he was reporting on the debrief was 100%. You just listened and done, do whatever he wanted. I mean, there was no ifs or buts.
He was a lovely bloke to work with. I never saw him sort of lose his temper. He'd get anxious if someone did something wrong on the circuit, but he was a clean driver. He would never take chances. He'd never push anybody. He didn't have to, because he was so smooth and ahead of the field most of the time.
He would drive around a problem when I was involved with the F2 in Barcelona. He put it on the front row, and he had some problems with understeer, but waiting for the old man to tell us what to do. But Jimmy had said, I really can drive through it with this circuit. I want to leave it. For instance, like Graham would come in, not in a good mood, saying that the car is hopeless, it's bump steering everywhere, and this is no good. And Jimmy, you would never see him do that. He would slightly talk to Colin and say, got his problem. We wouldn't be there to hear that, but that's what would happen. And he'd come out and there'd be a job list, and it'll be cool and calm, and got on with it. And it was unique, completely unique. For some reason, he related the human part of him to the car, to the mechanics of the car, in theory that joined together like twins. It was unique how he said, okay, leave it. I mean, for instance, before the race, the day before the race, he came in, he said, there's this vibration on the right. I don't understand what it is. It's weird. He says, especially on left-handers where the weight is on the rear suspension. He says, it's strange. He said, let's have a look. Shook the wheel and did everything. Couldn't see anything. Now he said, there's definitely something. So the old man said, oh, let's have a look. Let's have a look at the rear suspension. We stripped the upright. Have a look. And there's the rear wheel bearing, taper wheel bearing, just starting to go. I don't know how he could feel that. I couldn't believe any other driver could have felt that. Impossible.
With Graham Hill out of the running, Clark took the lead. At an average of 104.4, a great triumph for an untried car, Jim Clark won the Dutch Grand Prix for the fourth time.
He was a natural driver. It came to him easily. He was a very smooth driver. If you took the gearbox apart afterwards, you could just tell which was his gearbox because the gears were in good condition. Other drivers, there'd be bits and chips off. And he thought ahead, and he dedicated his life to winning the race. And if the car kept going in the 60s, we knew we'd be on a winner.
Well, Jim, without doubt, was the best driver. I think Fangio was the greatest driver of all time. Then I would put Jim Clark, because they were so versatile. You know, they drove different cars, sports cars, GT cars, touring cars, Indy cars. And Jim Clark did all of that well. Fangio did it in a different way. But both of them were, I think, the best racing drivers there's ever been, including today. Well, I know where I was when he died. I was testing a circuit in Spain for safety. And somebody came along and said, look, there's been an accident in Germany in a Formula 2 where I had turned down, that Ken Tyrrell had turned down going to that race for me. And they said he's dead. And I said, no, you can't be true. So we went back, and here he came again and told me, no, he's passed away. So I rushed home. Helen had only gone to Geneva for the very first time with Mark and Paul, my two sons. And I got back on the same day, obviously, as soon as I could. You know, in those days there were so many drivers losing their life. But Jim Clark, no way should Jim Clark ever have died. He drove a car in such a soft and gentle way. And there he was.
It still does to this day. The 7th of April is the most horrific day to me, and it still affects me. It always has done, right through my racing career. It was something you can't really describe, the feeling that the world's best driver is no longer there. And during the race, during practice, Jimmy said we cannot get any heat in the car, in the tyres. Cannot get any. He changed the shock absorbers settings, spring settings, roll bar settings to get more grip, to get more heat in the tyres. Couldn't do it. Same as Graham's car. And also Chris Amon was having the same problem with the Ferrari Dino at the same time. He couldn't handle anything. And on the grid, Jimmy, Chris and Graham got together on the grid and said, we're going to be very careful and let's just finish the race. You know, and not expecting. And Jimmy said to me on the grid, don't expect anything from me today. Just give me the times and laps to go. It was imperative, laps to go. And obviously 5 laps he didn't come round. And after that, the race was still going on, obviously, in those days. And so I asked the marshal who took me round, a track car came round and said, Jim Clark mechanic, Jimmy, because we had our chief mechanic there. And so they took me round to the circuit where the race was on in the car. And it was then no Armco, it was just tarmac trees. And it was trees, forest. And saw the wreckage. And when you're that young, you looked at it and said, where's the engine and gearbox? Where is it? And there was just a bit of a chassis. And obviously there was an ambulance there, and I don't want to go into that. And the gearbox, the engine and gearbox, it sized through the undergrowth 30 yards away. And then I asked the marshal there, the radio back, to tell the Michael Gregory to get Graham in. Give him the pit signal, get in. So that's what happened. They cut the race short, and then Graham got back to the paddock. Graham Hill took over. He was fantastic. It was unbelievable. He pulled us together, and he came around and said, right, get the truck over there to the track and get everything. And we got another team to help us load the wreckage and to get back to the hotel. And it's still trying to sink in that you just lost the best driver in the world. But the Jim Clark phenomenon went on through the rest of my life. You know, I did the Indy cars, and people used to come up, Dave Sims, Jim Clark, and IMSA, sports cars. People used to come up, families used to come up and say, Dave Sims. When I was working for Ferrari, we received competizione, and you would have children, fans, come up and say, Jim Clark. He can't, excuse me, it gets a bit. It's just amazing, the amount of people from the paddock who used to come over and try and speak to you and try and get autograph or whatever, to say, you talk to Jim Clark, you're with Jim Clark. I mean, I wasn't even with Jim Clark in Formula One. I mean, these guys here, they've done Jim Clark years before me in Formula One, etc., etc. I mean, I had in Mosport, Canada, I had a Mountie police came up all dressed up with his son, 15-year-old son, and the kid come around and hugged me and cried. It says it all.
I think I got on well with him, and in fact we all did really. He was just one of a special team.
And just finally, if you could describe Jim Clark in one word, what would that be?
Natural.
Colin Chapman, Jim Clark, winners.
To me, he'd be a god. Just unbelievable.